Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. Prime Minister Modi has returned from his first major international tour. During this trip to Brazil, he had extensive discussions with the presidents of China and Russia, secured a favourable deal for India in the new BRICS Bank, and caught the attention of photographers with his sartorial style. So is diplomacy emerging as one of the Prime Minister's unexpected hidden strengths? With me, the former editor of The Hindu, Siddharth Vardarajan, former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, K.C. Singh, and the foreign editor of the Hindustan Times and also a member of the National Security Advisory Board, Pramitpal Chaudhary. Siddharth Vardarajan, let me start with a simple general point. The Prime Minister has just returned from his first major trip abroad, where he met the Russian, Chinese, Brazilian, South African and several Latin American heads of state. Before we come to specifics, do you believe that this was a successful debut on the international stage?
Well, undoubtedly. I think that the summit for India, for the BRICS nations, has been an unqualified success. And to the extent to which Mr. Modi was untested at a major global platform, I think he's come out and come through with this with flying colors. I think that India was represented well. I think India put its best foot forward in the talks, in the summit. And I think that this is a very positive summit.
Pramitpal Chaudhary, in fact, if you look at the way he converted his swearing in into a mini SAARC summit and his deft handling of his Bhutan visit in June, and then this successful trip, as Siddharth Vardarajan says, to Brazil, do you get the feeling that the Prime Minister has taken to diplomacy and foreign policy with aplomb and perhaps even with a certain amount of elan?
Well, I think definitely, given that he had campaigned in the belief that he wouldn't have to do very much foreign policy and wouldn't focus on it, he's developed a liking for foreign policy. And he now clearly enjoys, if you wish, the pomp and splendor of diplomacy and international relations. But keep in mind that in terms of actual substance, he hasn't actually had a chance to do very much. None of these are major international arenas. None of these are major bilateral visits. And the substance ultimately is what matters in diplomacy. But the fact is that he does represent the return of India in international relations for a lot of foreign governments who last see what they believe to be a prime minister who can implement what he promises to do. And that way, I think everything so far is looking good. However, we need to keep in mind, as I said, substance is what matters in diplomacy, and we have yet to do that. We have yet to see that in Modi's foreign policy.
I will come to the question of substance and the extent to which you can judge substance by the 7 weeks that he's been Prime Minister in a moment's time. But I want to take up one more general point with you first, Siddharth Vardarajan. Do you also get the feeling that the Prime Minister enjoys diplomacy and perhaps enjoys in particular meeting heads of government? I mean, he seems to have been able to establish a fairly easy rapport with a diverse range of people like Xi Jinping, the young king of Bhutan, Nawaz Sharif, and clearly he seems to have a capacity to charm them. In fact, you often see the Prime Minister with smiles on his face when he's abroad. He's very rarely serious or perturbed or looking disturbed.
And he's really smiling back at home. Look, Karan, what's there not to like? I mean, you are the Prime Minister of the largest democracy in the world. You've won an unprecedented mandate, unprecedented in terms of 20-25 years. And throughout the world, people are expecting India to play a larger role in global affairs. Now, in Fortaleza, a lot of the actual legwork for the BRICS declaration was done by the Manmohan Singh, by the UPA, by the bureaucrats. I mean, the foundation stone for the BRICS Bank, etc. All that work preceded the Modi prime ministership. But I think he was able to carry it off well. I think that the Brazilians, the Russians, the Chinese would have, the South Africans would have gone away with the feeling that here's a man who it is good to do business with. There would be a comfort level, a confidence level, and I think that's positive.
K.C. Singh, let's now come to specifics and let's come to that point of substance that you heard Pramitpal Chaudhary say a moment ago was really the right way and proper way to judge the Prime Minister. There are reports that in fact he was very businesslike in his meetings with the Chinese President and the Russian President, that he covered all the points, he was the master of his brief. Is that an impression that you share and you have obtained yourself?
It's very difficult to say because he's not carried a media party. We are only getting accounts as given out by people around him. There's very little independent assessment that's coming in, or we are just seeing the pictures. So to make an assessment would be a very superficial assessment, and we have only the words of whoever is briefing the media to go by. So we should really stick to the text and see the outcomes, or we'll be judging really from the picture, which is a bit of a dumb shad.
In other words, you're saying we can't judge Mr. Modi's performance as a head of state traveling abroad and meeting others by what Syed Akbaruddin puts out on his behalf. Is that the point you're making?
Because he's not carried the media with him, which is probably the first time I've been a spokesman, and I think media is integral to any head of government traveling abroad, and it is the one which connects him to the public back home and gives an independent assessment of both his successes as well as any lapses. And in this case, to leave the media behind, I think this is a sign of lack of confidence.
Let me take that specific point up with you, Siddharth Varadarajan. He's been both criticized for leaving the media behind, he's also been praised for it. Where do you stand on that issue? Was it clever not to take the media so that he wasn't going to be cross-questioned and diverse and contradictory reports wouldn't come back? Or was he foolish because he's denied himself an opportunity to be able to communicate through the media the complex issues he's had to handle and score points as a result of the way he handled them?
I want to make 2 points in response. I think, firstly, Casey is right in general that there's very little substance, very little actual information to go by. But I don't think the amount of information would have been enhanced by the presence of a media delegation. I've traveled with the Prime Minister, when Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister, been on several visits, and the opportunity, like, what are the sources of information? You get it from the Indian delegation, or if you have time and you have contacts, you would interact with, say, the Brazilians or the Russians or the Chinese and get their sense. Now, the way these meetings go and the way the media schedule is, there's very little chance that an Indian media delegation has to interact with officials from other countries. So you're pretty much being spoon-fed by the Indian side anyway. So that's the problem. But I think what we've missed out on is the Q&A, the interview that the Prime Minister gives on board, which is, Manmohan Singh never gave interviews for 5 years, but he regularly spoke to the press during his flight back. And I think that's an important window that the Indian media gets to assess the Prime Minister's thinking, to assess his capabilities. It's a pity that Narendra Modi did not take a media delegation along with him. I think he may have suffered as a result, but I think at some extent it either shows his peak with the media or his lack of confidence. But I think it's an important issue that he should change his way of thinking on, and in future visits there must be a media delegation.
Let's come back once again, KC Singh, to a sharper focus on actually what he's achieved during these visits, particularly the one to Brazil. When it comes to negotiations over setting up the BRICS Bank, the PM seems to have agreed to accept Shanghai as the location in return for India getting the first presidency and in return for an equal equity division between all the countries. Was this a clever trade-off that got the best outcome for India, or would you say that's being too generous?
Look, we must remember that the Chinese economy in size equals the economy of the other 4. So it's so predominant in this grouping that really it was a no-brainer that it's going to be in Shanghai. Some leaks which came to the media earlier that PM will try for it, etc. I think they must have realized that in any case, there had already been meetings before, discussions. You could only use it for a trade-off to keep the participation at $10 billion each. That's all that you could do. But that doesn't change it very much either, because if you see the balance within it, everybody's got something. They've given something to the Russians, they've given a branch to South Africans, they've given something to... So it's one little present for all kids at the birthday party. But essentially it's a Chinese, there will be a Chinese predominance. And that is a foregone conclusion. And the other thing is, we must remember that South Africa came in at Chinese lobbying. Originally, this was only 4 countries. And many people raised eyebrows.
I take your point.
South Africa is not the size and not in the same club as the other groups. Let's
not get lost in detail. I take your point that in fact the media is being a little over-generous in giving undue credit to Prime Minister Modi for securing the first presidency. As you said, everyone got a little gift like children at a birthday party. I'm not sure whether Mr. Modi would like the analogy, but it's a pretty telling one nonetheless. Pramit Pal saying something else that I had noticed, forgive me, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, something else that I had noticed was that Mr. Modi's main BRIC speech was in English, and he seemed to have no real problem with the language, yet he prefers to conduct negotiations in Hindi. So is he learning to use language to his benefit and advantage? Hindi when he thinks it's going to give him extra time, English when he wants to show the world I can speak it as well as anyone else. And better, by the way, than the Chinese and the Russians.
I mean, he's never had a problem, he's never had a problem with English. I've met a number of foreign ambassadors even before he became Prime Minister who have met him and said that there is no issue as far as English is concerned. We converse with him in English and it's perfect. He himself, as I gather, privately said to journalists, I don't have an issue between Hindi and English. Sometimes if I think it makes sense to use Hindi, I use Hindi, and sometimes when it makes sense, I think I use English. It's not a question of nationalism, it's not a question of some specific game. But yes, I think that he's adopted the Chinese, he seems to have adopted the Chinese pattern of using a translator even when he doesn't need it, because it gives him an opportunity to think about his answers and gives him a little time lag. But he's been free to use English only sometimes in his talks with foreign diplomats and officials.
K.C. Singh, what about that clever phone call to Angela Merkel during his return stop in Frankfurt on the way home when he wished her happy birthday? Mr. Modi seemed to have used the occasion to invite her to India and to try and establish some sort of personal relationship with her. Would Dr. Manmohan Singh have done anything similar?
You know, because there was a bit of an embarrassment because Prime Minister kept his stopover in Berlin because there was a planned meeting with her and she wanted to meet him. And it was a bit embarrassing because she had to go for the football match, which could have been anticipated because Germany was always headed in that direction. But now that he was coming back, I think he's very nicely covered that up. Germany and Japan are very important for us. They're with us in the G4 grouping, which agitates for the expansion of the Security Council. They are a very important partner in Europe for us and the largest economy. So I think this is good, establishing a relationship with the Chancellor when he couldn't meet her during his transit halt was desirable.
Siddharth Varadarajan, I want to come to an issue or a point or an aspect of Mr. Modi that the Aam Aadmi, so to speak, would have noticed each time he saw Mr. Modi on television in Brazil. We saw the Prime Minister in a series of different coloured bangalas, and on top of that, there was that widely published photograph of his arrival in Brasilia with a flowing scarf around his neck, and I think striking quite a catching pose. Would you say that he's a natty dresser who's establishing quite a style of his own?
That's a tough one to answer. I think, there are very little options to play with, quite frankly, at that level, because there are expectations that the world at large would have from the Prime Minister of any country in a formal or semi-formal setting. And I think within those options, he certainly seems to show more flexibility than Manmohan Singh showed. I'm not sure what that means, though.
But yes, actually, when you talk about more flexibility than Manmohan Singh showed, and then yourself ask, you don't know what it means, you may well be right. I'm not sure I know what it means, but let me try and translate you and make a question out of it for Pramit Pal Chaudhary. One of the things I couldn't help notice, Pramit, was that at the delegation talks with China, everyone was wearing either black or charcoal grey, except for Mr. Modi, who had a cream bangala. And it certainly, when you looked at the photograph, made him stand out. The only figure on that table of 22 who stood out was our Prime Minister because he had a cream bangala. In your eyes, was that a clever and sensible way of attracting attention, or do you think that's one instance where perhaps the Prime Minister might revise wearing white?
I don't think there's a problem in standing out. It's not too hard to stand out among the Chinese because they always wear the same black and grey suits. Indian diplomats also wear black and grey suits, or mainly grey. So the end result is that if you decide not to wear either of them, you will by definition stand out. And I don't think Modi has any problems with standing out in a crowd, and I don't think he has any problem standing out in an international diplomatic arena. I think that's fine. To be fair, even if Manmohan Singh had been in that audience, he would normally he wore white and a blue turban, he also would have stood out. But the real difference ultimately is that Modi is a lot more active looking in front of a camera than Manmohan Singh, who tends to be a bit on the stony-faced, rigid side when he was in front of a camera.
Very quickly, KC Singh, the impression, image and the way the world thought of Mr. Modi before he became Prime Minister was obviously coloured by 2002. Now they probably discover an extremely energetic man, a man who has a certain sartorial flair, a man who certainly has a capacity to charm heads of government when he meets them. Do you think the Chinese, the Russians, the Brazilians are a bit taken by surprise?
No, the embassies would have been briefing them. They would have fully known about his personality and the way he's dominating the new government and the BJP. I think they were well prepared for exactly what they got. Now the question is, what is the impression they took away? That we don't know. That would depend on what conversation you have with them and how they assess it, how much you press them, how they feel that you're able to marshal your advantages and get something out of them through negotiation. That is an impression that they will carry away. But something of the kind that he told the Russian president, every child in India would know that we have special relations, was a bit like Mr. Manmohan Singh telling President Bush, Mr. President, Indians love you. No, I'm sure Putin doesn't take that very much to heart. Okay. He's a hardened ex-KGB operative who'll that's just so much water off his back. He will make a realistic assessment. These things are fine, but he'll make a realistic assessment.
All right, let me draw a moral from that particular story that you told us. It clearly suggests that the Prime Minister has a line in flattery, but he needs to make it a touch more sophisticated. It's a little bit too obvious for the likes of Putin to be simply told that every Indian looks upon Russia as his favorite friend is the sort of thing that might make the Russian president smile, but he may not necessarily believe it. That's what you call hard-nosed diplomacy with a gentle, soft smile behind it. My thanks to KC Singh, Pramit Pal Chaudhary and Siddharth Varadarajan for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday.